Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bandoma Callado, and I am a trial attorney at the Dolan Law Firm. I represent workers in harassment, discrimination, whistleblower, wrongful termination, and human trafficking cases, as well as individuals in personal injury, elder abuse, and hate crime cases. I am so honored to serve as FBANC's 2020 to 2021 president. It's been a long day, and everyone at this point has Zoom fatigue, so thanks so much for attending this last part of our day. I also encourage all of you to either stand up and just shake that off. Actually, how about this? Let's all take a collective breath together. So, I've been thinking about this last year, and before I started my term as FBANC president last year, I made so many plans and imagined different things that I really wanted to accomplish. But living through this pandemic, it really changed and challenged a lot of us in so many ways. I personally have learned to be more forgiving about my ability to balance work and family life. There's really nothing like working from home with a 2-year-old that makes you appreciate your partner more. And I've also made peace with not being able to make plans and prepare the way I normally would. And, really acknowledge that it's hard to be prepared when we don't know what's coming. And while this past year has been extremely tough, it gave many of us the opportunity to focus on what's important during a time when the realities of sickness and death are on the forefront of our minds. And that's exactly what FBANC has done this past year. We focused on pivoting and implementing innovative and creative ways to do what is important to the FBANC community. So today I'm happy to celebrate FBANC's continued service and advocacy, as well as our efforts to diversity and the legal profession. We hosted Know Your Rights webinars, virtual legal clinics. We partnered up with other organizations on putting on programming on racial justice, fighting for civil rights, fundraising for the typhoons that devastated, the Philippines this past year. We hosted several virtual professional development events and networking, including legacy panels featuring FBANC's past presidents, and several social events to stay connected with our FBANC family. One thing I am most proud of is FBANC's efforts to build the pipeline of FBANC attorneys through our foundation scholarships, our mentorship program, and the virtual Komunidad conferences that we've held this past year, including today. As Ray and Antonio emphasized this morning, FBANC was established for all of you, the future leader of FBANC. So if there's anything else we can do to support you, please reach out and let us know. I also want to extend my appreciation to everyone that made today's Komunidad conference happen. First, I would like to thank Farrell Lebron Martel and the Dolan Law Firm for supporting FBANC's mission for providing Filipino, A's, and X's American lawyers and law students in Northern California with professional development and educational assistance. Thank you to all our moderators from the Bay Area PALS Coalition for spending your Saturday with us. Thank you to Ted Borromeo for kicking off Komunidad with his top 10 tried and true tips for success. I especially appreciated Ted's advice on staying true to yourself. In my 8 years of practice, I've learned that my identity as a Filipinx attorney is so valuable. I bring in a unique perspective that other attorneys at my firm might not necessarily have. Let's face it, many of our colleagues that we have are predominantly white male. So it's really important that you do stay true to yourself. Thank you to Rich, Vanessa, Suzette, and Amy for giving valuable insight into what makes a successful and memorable candidate. One of the questions that really stood out to me is that, how to navigate imposter syndrome. I appreciated the panelists sharing great tips about being prepared for the interview, but also, again, being authentic to yourself to overcome this feeling. I do want to acknowledge, though, that for people of color, women, for members of the LGBTQ community, imposter syndrome isn't just an imaginary voice in our heads as we receive almost daily messages from mainstream society that we don't belong. One thing I would like to add is that before you go into that interview, really be your own hype man or hype woman, right? Think of everything you've had to overcome to get to where you are and remind yourself of your own achievements. Remind yourself that you are breaking barriers, being in law school and becoming a Filipinx attorney, and that you are an inspiration to so many. Thank you so much to Nelson, Chriselle, Delisai, and Alex for sharing the various activities you were involved in during law school and how you've successfully applied the skills you developed during law school. I think it was really inspiring that you highlighted self-care and the values that we bring to the table with our diverse background and experiences. Jen, Rachel, Mark, and Mika, thank you for sharing your thoughts and tips on how to initiate, cultivate, and sustain not just meaningful, but really genuine mentorship relationships, especially during the pandemic. Big thanks to the FBANC board, especially to FBANC Vice President Ray Rowland and Maribeth Charvet, one of our mentorship directors, for putting on this fantastic program today. There's so much work that goes into planning a conference like this, and I hope everyone who attended is just as inspired as I am. Thank you to all of you attendees for joining us today. If you're not yet a member of FBANC, please consider joining. As many speakers said today, networking is so important, and being an FBANC member will give you access to the amazing attorneys and judges who are FBANC members. We are hosting a membership drive for law students who attend today. Our law student membership is usually $25, but you can get it for $15 during this drive. And your support really allows us to continue putting on programs like Komunidad. Finally, thank you to our keynote speaker today, the Honorable Audra Ibarra, a fierce Pinay powerhouse, a trailblazer in the legal community, an incredible mother, and a dedicated public servant. Judge Ibarra is the first Filipino American judge on the Santa Clara County bench and the first Filipina American trial judge in the SF Bay Area. She serves as the president-elect of the California Asian Pacific American Judges Association and on the advisory board of the Continuing Education of the Bar. Good afternoon, Judge Ibarra.
Thank you for having me. Hello, FBANC and Bay Area pals.
So we'll get started with our fireside chat. My first question for you is related to the theme of today's conference, Pagdiriwang. To say that the past year has been tough would be a massive understatement, as 2020 was devastating for so many people. And as I mentioned earlier, part of the reason we decided on Pagdiriwang as a theme for the spring 2021 Komunidad is to celebrate the resilience of our community. What does this theme mean to you? And can you think of a silver lining that's come out of the COVID-19 crisis?
I can, and I am generally an optimist, even when things are bleak. So I'm always thinking about silver linings. And so personally, I have like the family silver lining of there's been like really intense family bonding lately with my little kids who are remote homeschooling. And I can see that they're coming out more empathetic and resilient because of it. I will say that when we first went into the COVID lockdown, which was last spring, it was right before spring break where we were supposed to take a big family trip with 3 other families. And the word that my kids used to describe it, even in their journals for school, was COVID was devastating for them because they couldn't go on their family vacation, which we had to like recalibrate and figure out what devastating means over the next, year. Then this year, my kids were asked, what is your challenge at home? And this time my son had to really think about it. And he said, you know what, I'm having a problem thinking of a challenge. And I think that is a product of having a really bad year, but not personally bad, but really just watching everybody else struggle and realizing how lucky we are. Not that we have everything, but there's always somebody else who's in need of help that you can help, that you can look at and say, well, like, thank goodness I can help this person and I'm not worrying about me. So that's like on a personal level. On a kind of a global level, I am super impressed with the way people stepped up this past year with, community service, the first offender, the first responders, the doctors, the nurses, but even people of Generation Z, the Zoomers, which I think your audience is. There's this thing called Zoomers to Boomers, and I don't know if you heard of that, but there's like Zoomers to Boomers are students and people that are Generation Z who've signed up, and I think there's like 1,000 members now in 38 cities who have agreed to deliver food to boomers, the people like 65 and older who are either in need of food because they can't get to help safely to the supermarket, or if you're not of that age, if you're incapacitated. So things like that really give me hope for the future. At a work level, I would say that I think that Santa Clara County Superior Court, the judicial branch generally, and just the law generally has made leaps and bounds in terms of using remote technology. What used to be, I think, an ideal and like aspirational, something we should invest in and do in the future, is now the norm. And so I would say for all of the students who are watching that I'm really impressed with your resiliency and your flexibility. And I hope that you're taking advantage of the opportunity, like I know you are right now, to attend things that are not local. And then I hope that you know that because you had to live through this, it's going to give you skills to be able to work remotely in the future, even when COVID's over, right? You're not going to necessarily have to have a job in the same city that you are in. And so I think that's one of the many silver linings of an otherwise bleak situation.
I know there's so much that we can be hopeful for, especially with the vaccines being, delivered. And I just look forward to all of us being back together and celebrating, all of the things that we should have celebrated last year, including FBANC's 40th anniversary, for example.
Right.
Right. So before we move on to my next question, Maribeth, can you go ahead and put on the first Zoom poll? So the question is for our attendees today: do you aspire to become a judge one day? And you have yes, no, or maybe. So give that a couple of minutes. My question for Judge Ibarra, as we wait for folks to respond, is talk about your background and journey to the bench. So after graduating from New York University School of Law, you served as a Solano County prosecutor and then became a federal prosecutor and then worked as an appellate attorney. I mean, that is a fantastic career. Can you tell us more about your path to the bench and when did you first consider becoming a judge?
So I had a really zigzaggy, and I hope to still have in the future, a zigzaggy career. My goal had always been to help people and do it in a way that I'm passionate about, and do it in the way that I find most interesting. So early on, to me, that meant being a criminal trial attorney. I started out actually in the public defender's office. When I was at Berkeley, I interned for the public defender. And then I went to law school, and then I realized that the prosecutor has a lot of responsibility and authority, and they can not only give closure to victims, but they can also, dismiss or, reduce charges that they don't think are fair. And I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And I also realized in law school that I thought that the U.S. attorney had like the most interesting cases. So straight out of law school, I went to a big firm because that was the way that you usually got to the U.S. attorney's office. But after a couple of years at the big firm, I was like, well, this is I'm not totally passionate about the work that I was doing there, although I love the people and the work was interesting. I got to go to court. I had interesting civil cases, but I wasn't getting to court as much as I wanted to, and I wasn't doing criminal cases like I wanted to. So I became a DA, like you mentioned. And then I eventually got to a U.S. attorney's office. I went to the U.S. attorney's office in the Southern District of California, and then I went into the U.S. attorney's office in the Northern District of California, where I eventually became the deputy chief of the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. And so I was doing wiretap investigations, grand jury investigations, jury trials, and Ninth Circuit appeals. And then on top of it, because I was a supervisor, I was supervising a team of 13 senior prosecutors doing the same thing. And at any given time, we had like 24 cases each. So it was really, and then on any one of those cases, we had like a dozen or more agents staffed on it. So it was a really, really, really fun and exciting job for me. And I remember driving one point during this job, and I thought, I could retire now. I was really young. I could retire now, and I hit my career goal. This is so fun, right? But I guess this is just what I'm going to do for like, you know, the rest of my career. And then I realized that as fun as that was, it was like, for me, the way I worked it was almost a 24/7 job, because I would get phone calls in the middle of the night. And this is like before everything was remote. So I would get cell phone calls or texts in the middle of the night that we lost a confidential informant and there's a hit out on him. And can I come back into the office and like try to figure out how to get him and keep him safe, and then what we need to do in the court and things like that. So that wasn't the way I grew up. I grew up in the Midwest, and I grew up with a mom who, at least during my early years, was at home through elementary school. And so I wanted to start a family, and I thought, I want to simulate that as much as I can. And so I left the law completely for about 4 years. And literally I was on inactive status, so completely not doing any lawyer work. And during that time, I ran into somebody at an event, at a party, at a wedding actually, who started talking to me about my past career as a U.S. attorney. And and he like just kept asking me questions. And then at the end of the conversation, he said, "You should be a federal judge." And I was like, what? I had never entered my mind to be a judge of any sort at all. And I thought, I don't know how that happens, but I'm pretty sure being in active status is not one of the ways people get to be a judge. And he actually said it's more merit-based than you think. There's an actual application process, both for the federal and the state. And then he like took the time to walk me through both processes. And he was like, look, I know you're inactive now. I think this is something you need to think about and consider it for your future. And so at the time I wasn't, you know, I mean, it was like awesome, but I wasn't ready. But I knew that there was something else now that I could aspire to do someday. And so I decided to go back into the law after 4 years of taking time off to start a family. My family was officially started. And the reason I chose appellate practice was it was something where I can help people. I could stay involved with the community because I did a lot of community service during that time. And I could be really passionate about it. And I could also simulate working it around my kids. And be there for them so that they would, I would function like a full-time mom for them and a full-time lawyer simultaneously. So it was a lot of lost sleep and lost weekends, but literally people at my kids' school like were surprised to find out that I was working. So that's kind of my zigzag career path. And then eventually I was lucky enough to be appointed.
So the Zoom poll resulted, you know, I was happily surprised that there's a lot of maybes. This is not a question that I have on our list today, but is there any words of encouragement for those who said maybe that you have for folks to kind of just push them to really consider this path?
I would say, given that I didn't also, I mean, literally, if you would have asked me all the way even through being a U.S. attorney, this was something I had planned, I would say no. It wasn't on my punch list. So I would say you do things that you're passionate about and you do them as well as you can. And I'm all for, again, I like am pro zigzaggy. I know a lot of people who've had a zigzaggy path to the bench. I admire that. But I think that when you're making your choices about what is going to be your next job, again, it has to be something that you're passionate about and it's something you do well. You just try to make sure that it's something that it's not going to foreclose you from doing this. So you don't necessarily choose a job because you think that's going to make you a judge, but you just make sure that that door is always open. In other words, and again, there's like no litmus test for being a judge, but it would have been much, much harder, I think, if I would have gone in-house, and not just in-house, but in-house corporate side doing like transactional work, right? And that's all I did. Again, it's not a litmus test. Maybe there are some people who probably did that and became judges, but I think that's the harder road to take. So for those of you who want to be a judge, I think choose things that you're passionate about, do them as well as you can. And then when you make job choices, choose things that keep the door open, but not necessarily, it doesn't have to be the thing that you think is going to make you a judge, because there are a lot of things that can get you to be a judge.
On that note, I do want to promote our event on Monday, our judiciary panel, which is at noon on Monday. Please sign up for that if you're, considering becoming a judge. You can hear from other trailblazers like Judge Ibarra here today. So my next question is on the importance of mentorship or sponsorship. We got really great tips from the earlier panel on mentorship. On how to cultivate, a genuine mentorship relationship. So on your path to the bench, it sounded like there was someone who sort of introduced this concept of becoming a judge to you. Can you talk a little bit about the meaningful relationships that you had with mentors, and your thoughts on how law students can develop this relationship, especially during the pandemic?
So definitely I had my mentors and sponsors. I don't think anyone gets to the bench without having some sponsorship or mentorship. And of course, the difference between mentorship and sponsorship, I think the two words are interchangeable, but if you really want to define them, like a mentor, teaches you how to do something, that you learn a lot from them. They try to make you the best at whatever you're doing. I think a sponsor is really the one who like propels you forward, in addition to maybe like teaching you stuff, but also kind of paves the way for you, might make introductions for you, might like back your play, be your reference, things like that. So I think relevant to, so that I definitely had that and still have that. Coming into being a judge, like to get to be a judge, and then also now currently, I totally value my relationships, and I think that goes a long way to having mentors and sponsors. But I think relevant to our conversation is, how do you develop these relationships? So after 4 years of being in active status, so like here I was like a prosecutor who did like some Ninth Circuit appeals, but they were always for the prosecution. So like obviously the prosecution's not going to hire me. They already have their U.S. attorneys to do, their federal prosecutors already have their U.S. attorneys to do their prosecution appeals. I'm like, okay, man, I want to do like appeals. And I want to do them, mostly civil, maybe some criminal. Criminal would be defense, and civil would be just totally different, right? And I was like, how am I going to do this? Like my friends used to call it a cold start, because it was so different from everything I was doing. And then also, in addition to changing practice areas, I was also going to go from just exclusively federal to federal and state. So I, believe it or not, cold emailed everybody who had a practice at the level that I wanted to. So I did like a lot of research, and I probably came up with a dozen or so names up here in the Bay Area, and then a dozen or so names in Southern California. And I emailed them, and my email was like, hi, I'm, my name, and here's my background, and I really admire your career. I'm considering going into this area. I would love to get any advice that you have to share, because you've been so successful. I will make myself available to you for a coffee, a lunch, or a phone call, whatever you can fit in. And I had a 90% like response rate, and that's cold. These are like no context. And then I like obviously gave, bought the coffee, bought the lunch, whatever I needed to do. Obviously this would, for you all, might be more remote, but then I listened to what they had. I wasn't ever asking for a job. I listened to what they had to say. And I, would say, sometimes just the one-on-one meeting went so well, they said, do you want a mentor? And I'd be like, yeah, but sometimes I'd listen to them and I'd say, would you mind if I assisted you on something and, wouldn't necessarily be for pay? Would you mind if we put on an MCLE together? I will do the heavy lifting and I will do the slides. I will do everything and your name will be first because you're the talent and I'm the producer. Would you mind if we write an article together? Same thing. I'll do everything. Your name will go first. My name will go second, and you can edit the heck out of whatever I have to do. But I would just love to work on a project with you. And these people, like, not of all of them, but the ones that I had the really good connection with, I was always looking to see how I could help them be better at what they are doing. And in return, they would send me cases, referrals. One of them actually brought me into their firm eventually. One of them, some of them I did a lot of MCLEs with. One of them sent me a case which they had to recuse themselves of because of a conflict, and it was literally in the Supreme Court at the time they sent me. So this works, but you have to put yourself out there and be thinking of how can I be beneficial to them so that they can rely on me, but then they actually have some reason to speak highly of me and sponsor me and mentor me because they've actually seen my process and I've helped them. And so it's not like they're just saying, they're wanting to promote somebody they don't know anything about. They've actually had the benefit of the relationship too. So I think one thing I learned from one of my friends who's a headhunter is he used to always say, I end all conversations, one-on-one conversations with, is there anything else I can do to help you? And it didn't have to be job related. He's just like, is there anything I can help you with? And you would be surprised how many people have like just one little thing and it would cost you nothing to help them. So I encourage you to reach out to people in whose practice areas you want to work and have that kind of conversation.
I mean, that's really what the last panel talked about. It's mentorship relationship. It's a two-way street. It's not just about, asking for things from the mentor, but like ways you can support each other. I'm going to transition to the topic of bias next. We have another Zoom poll for our attendees today, and I do recognize that we're going over time, but these are all really great things that we're learning from Judge Ibarra. So the poll is, during your time at law school, have you been treated differently because of, all of these different things about your identity? So go ahead and answer that. And then we have a follow-up question to that, which is about how you usually respond to being treated differently. And, for Judge Ibarra, even though the San Francisco Bay Area is home to one of the largest communities of Filipinos outside the Philippines, we're still underrepresented in the legal industry. And I often experience bias in my practice, not just in the courtroom or opposing counsel, but sometimes even from my own client. For example, one of my clients didn't even realize that I'm an attorney, even though we had talked so many times, prepared her for so many different, hearings or depositions. And she was just like, well, you're too nice to be an attorney, which is also sort of like, well, what does that mean? Is it because I'm Asian American? Is it because I'm small in stature? So, do you have any advice on how to respond to moments like this? And it's looking like we received maybe half of the responses. And yeah, it's so many of us go through this.
I come from a place that unless it's obvious, I mean, for sure, this breaks your heart every time it happens. But unless it's obviously malicious, I assume that it's just inadvertent and unintentional and uneducated. Not uneducated, affirmatively racist, because that's a whole nother bucket. But the bucket I'm talking about is, I was thinking hard about this. I don't think anybody has been affirmatively racist in the workplace towards me. But there have been, little tweaks of bias here and there, just assumptions made, right? And I always tell my kids they should always have something in their back pocket to come back with a snappy, funny one-liner, so that, like a zinger, so that, it just makes fun of the situation, not the other person, because you don't want to then become like the angry Filipino either, because again, it's not affirmatively racist. And so usually I say, so for me, for one time, like so many times this has happened, but one time I was the DA, standing at the DA's table, judge is at the bench, defense attorney comes in, nobody else in the courtroom. He walks right by me and he says, "Where's the DA?" I mean, if there's any better circumstantial evidence than me standing there at the DA's table and the only other person in the courtroom other than the judge, I don't know what it is. And I looked at him, I'm like, "You're looking at her and she's gonna win too." And he was, you know, as he is what you might imagine, the kind of defense attorney that there was at that time. So older, kind of established, looked like somebody you'd see on Perry Mason, kind of guy. So he looked the part. I obviously didn't look what he thought my part should be. I won, obviously. And then after that, you know, he always treated me with respect, and we actually became friends. And I think that was completely inadvertent, right? Implicit bias on his part. So I always try to have some kind of zinger in my back pocket for the situation to kind of make fun of it, and then kind of like push back so that they know a little bit like, hey man, think twice before you say something so silly.
Yeah, it's looking like from our poll results that there's a good chunk of folks who just don't know how to react. So those are great tips on how to address that. My next question for you is on the importance of community and diversity in the legal profession. So it took a long time after Judge Kidishe's historic appointment to the bench before another Filipino American became a judge in the SF Bay Area, and that's, you know, Judge Reyes's appointment to the Contra Costa County bench, and, you know, your appointment came shortly thereafter. So we were really excited that we went from having no one to suddenly we have two. You know, what does being the first mean to you, and what does that mean for our community?
That's a good question. So, you know, Judge Kidishe didn't retire until Judge Reyes was appointed, which I thought was very special. And we have I know Judge Kidishe, of course, but I know Judge Reyes very well. And I think I was about a year or so after Judge Reyes. And I remember he was so happy to have another one. He was like, again, for community's sake, he was like, "Audra, there is so much that our community needs from us because it's only us." You know what I mean? And so like for him and me, like we take turns at these events. Like I know that he appeared at Komunidad previously, right? And so I think it's important, like community is important in that we have to recognize that we have a responsibility to the community to be there for them, because if you are one or one of the only ones, you need to encourage other people. You don't want to be the last. You want to encourage other people and inspire other people, and then also just be there for events and stuff to uplift the rest of the community, right? Personally, I would say for all of the FBANC members and for the Bay Area pals, I don't think you know how broad your community is. First of all, I'm super impressed with your network because I was reflecting on my bar career or my law school career, and I think I might have been the only Filipino in my class at NYU. But certainly even if there were other Filipinos, there wasn't a separate Filipino bar, right? So a Filipino bar student association. But even beyond your networking within PALS and then FBANC, your influence on the community goes much broader. And I guess my example of this is that when I was first appointed to the bench, and I knew I was the first female female trial judge in the Greater Bay Area, and then I also knew I was the first Filipino judge in Santa Clara. I got sworn in on January 3rd, which was in the Christmas, New Year's holiday. Most of the judges were not present during that time at the court. The only people who were there were the people who drew the short straw and absolutely had to cover something that needed to go on that day. The way the swearing-in at our court work is they happen at 4:30 or 4 o'clock. And the idea is that we didn't do them by Zoom, we did them in person. So the idea is that if you are one of the few judges who are in court and you could make it over to the courthouse, because we have many courthouses, make it over to the courthouse in time, you would see the swearing in. So I was going to get sworn in on January 3rd at 4:30. And I thought for sure it will be just my family and my kids, and maybe a friend or two that I had told about it. And when I walked in, it was standing room only. And I didn't really understand what was going on, like how it could possibly be in this humongous courtroom, standing room only. And I mean, like, the jury box was filled with judges, the audience was filled with judges and justices, and also people from the courts and the community. And I didn't understand what was going on until after the whole event. And I realized that a lot of the people that came were Filipino clerks in the court, because for so long we'd had such a huge number of Filipino staff, but they'd never actually seen a Filipino judge. So they've been serving the courts too in like the hardest way possible as clerks, but they've never gotten to work with somebody who looked like them. And they all came and they, invited other people from the courts and things like that. And so the reason it was standing room only was because of them. And I realized that it really meant so much more just than to me and my family or to like the Filipino lawyers, but it really meant something to the community because, they could then go home and tell their families, hey man, we have a Filipino judge, and they could tell their kids and their grandkids, like, this is something you can do someday, which was the funny thing about it was it was kind of hard to get used to, but there was a lot of picture taking with me about like, can you take a picture? Like even when I would go to work then at the courts, like the clerks would pull me over like and say, do you mind if I just take one picture with you? So it was so heartening. And I really learned that like, it's really not about me. It's really about like having a first for our community and then like being there for the community and making sure that the door stays open and trying to like inspire as many people and help as many people to continue.
I really love that story, and it's so heartwarming to hear about the support of, the community that you were able to experience that. And as we did go a little bit over time, so thank you so much for staying with us, and everyone else who's still attending this. There is a happy hour networking event right after this one. Do you have any advice to the law students, and if any of the law students or aspiring law students who are still here have any questions for Judge Ibarra, please feel free to type it in the Q&A section. Do you have any, general advice as they navigate their law career?
Well, yes, I'm going to give a quick piece of advice. But before I drop off, I just wanted to say thank you to FBANC, to Bay Area Pals, to you, Mari, to Ray, and to Maribeth. I think what you're doing is incredible. Like I said, there was nothing like this at the time I was going through law school. So I think that you're providing a great service. And for all you students joining us, you've already got a leg up on so many people with the networking and the programming and the connections that you have. I'm so impressed. And the fact that you're spending your day here, I already know you're go-getters. So my advice would be, you're already halfway up the mountain. There are not enough Filipinos in leadership roles in general, but in the law also. That is because there are not enough Filipinos in the law. There are like over 16% of California is Asian, and the largest age group within the Asians is Filipino. But that percentage of Filipino population in California is not commensurate with the Filipino legal population. So if we want to be leaders generally, and then in the law, we're going to need to have more people go into the law. So you're 50% there towards being a leader just by like joining the legal force. The other part of it is being the absolute best you possibly can, because a person is more than their diversity. I always say, and I speak to a lot of students and from elementary school on through law school, I always say that you want somebody to be able to cover your name and cover your face and not know anything about your actual background, just read your resume and know what your experience is and think this is the person. And then you want the diversity to be the cherry on the top of the cake. That is the reason you bring something more to it, right? So like, you're the best no matter what, hands down. But then on top of it, because of your background, the decisions that are going to be made, whether it be in corporate America or in private law firms or on the bench, or in government law offices are going to be more robust because it's going to have a greater diversity in the conversation in deciding what the right thing to do is. But remember, you're 50% there, and you have to be excellent at what you do and have integrity. That plus your diversity will take you to leadership. Good luck.
Well, thank you.